Hello, everybody. How's it going? Marcus here, your chef on a mission, and going through reading some articles right now and do some correspondence with some other activists out there. I was chatting with somebody on Skype about salmon farms, and of course, I want to talk about some of the current news in salmon, in the salmon world, in the farm salmon world. Most of you know that I am very, very, very opposed to open pen salmon farms. I think they are one of the worst detriments to our health and to the environment, hands down. And a lot of these activists, people who live in these communities, will tell you they are terrible. Now, if you ask a chef who's buying farm salmon, he's not going to tell you that because they're in it for they're buying a cheaper product, they're buying something, or their salesperson told them that their salmon is different. Oh, chef so-and-so, we're selling you better salmon. If it's from a salmon farm, if it's open pen, which is how most salmon are raised, open pen, not inland containment system. If it's open pen, you will be buying a salmon that is not good for you or the environment. That's just what happens, okay? I don't care where it comes from, Scotland, Norway, Canada, East Coast Canada, West Coast Canada, Nova Scotia, Chile, New Zealand. I don't care where it's coming from. You are going to have issues with the way the salmon is farmed in the environment. So right now in British Columbia, 200,000 farmed salmon have perished in the salmon farms. This happened in Norway a month or so ago, 2 months ago. Several 100,000 salmon have perished in farms. Here's what's currently happening around the world on these toxic salmon farms. Okay, there's these algae blooms that are happening. Now, the science is unclear right now. If you read and saying, well, salmon farms aren't causing the blooms, the science isn't clear enough to say the salmon farms are or not causing the salmon blooms. What we do know is that the farm salmon cannot swim away from the blooms. Wild salmon, wild fish can swim away and get out of the area of disaster of these algae blooms. Farm salmon aren't. They're trapped in the cages. And we do know that the algae blooms do feed off of dead salmon, the feces, the food, things like that, the rotting food. So they feed off of the waste that are coming out of salmon farms. So that's one thing that they do know. Yeah, it does feed off of it. So these toxic algae blooms come in and sweep through everything in these bays and devastate a lot of things. So the salmon farms, literally, when you trap that many salmon into these pens like this, folks, a lot of them die. But now here's the thing: some of the salmon don't die. Some of them are exposed to these toxic algae blooms and they don't die. So guess what happens to those? You guessed it. If that specific algae doesn't affect humans, they say if it doesn't affect humans, those fish get processed and sold right through the food chain. If it's an algae that's known to possibly be harmful to humans, then that salmon is put down and they're sent to rendering plants. Here's the thing: they're sent to rendering plants. They're probably turned back into salmon pellets, fish pellets to feed other fish. It's this whole cycle of what's going around. So it's not like the salmon are totally wasted. They're going to get rendered down and put into another product. So maybe cat food and maybe dog food. I did something yesterday on how one of my dogs and cats was getting sick from chicken that I was feeding it and just not agreeing with it. And the other chicken was totally fine. It was fine. So this stuff, folks, get put back into your pet food. This toxic dead salmon gets rendered right down. So when you go to the store and you see, made with whole salmon, unless you're buying the salmon yourself and cutting it up and putting it in their food, you really have no idea what salmon parts or the health of the salmon that actually went in there. Now, salmon can be very healthy for you, but wild salmon is far superior than farmed salmon. In fact, I just read another article on how they want to label certain salmon, farm salmon from Maine, because of the high mercury content, saying that this should be limited consumption. And this is something that Maine is trying to pass right now because some of the salmon farms are known for having high mercury levels. So when you're eating a piece of so-called farmed salmon or salmon that looks beautiful and supposed to be beautiful and you think is great for your health, it can have an adverse effect on you. So that salmon that Martha Stewart's pushing, when she says, oh, I live here and I go out here and here are the salmon farms and this and that, she's getting paid a lot of money from that company The same thing as as that other celebrity chef, the one who has I'll think of his name. I've sent him a couple of tweets and he hasn't answered me on why he's supporting this farm salmon. He calls himself the Godfather of sustainable seafood. Why am I dropping? I was supposed to meet with him face to face 2 years ago in Vegas, and I walked in the restaurant and he was there, and all of a sudden he was gone, and they told me that he had left, and I tweeted him, I want to talk to him about, hey, just tell me what's so special about your farmed salmon. You are the Godfather of sustainability, fish sustainability. So I just want to know why your farmed open pen salmon is so much better. And it turns out that they were serving 2 different types of farmed salmon at the restaurant. One was from Scotland. Folks, Scotland is probably one of the worst areas to buy farmed salmon from. The worst. They are known for some of the most toxic farmed salmon out there, the most deplorable conditions, the most polluted bays because what the salmon farms do. And I don't care if it's from the Faroe Islands. Faroe Islands are not much better than any of their salmon farms. They're salmon farms. Faroe Islands had issues with dumping toxic waste after World War II up there because it was in the middle of nowhere. So they're like, let's dump this stuff up there off this island. So that's where some of this radioactive, I think, waste went. I've read that a couple times. Farmed salmon, they're dying by the hundreds of thousands in these salmon farms because the algae blooms. And again, they're not saying that the algae blooms are caused, but they're not saying that that's not the cause. There's no clear evidence either way, folks. But what we do know is that these salmon farms exacerbate this algae because of all the toxicity, all the dead salmon that come off of it, the feces, just toxicity, the food, things like that, just breed all of that and keep blooming. And of course, the salmon can't swim away and escape, so they sit there. And some of that salmon does make it into the market, onto your plate. Folks, be very, 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 very skeptical about farm salmon. I'd actually be 100% cautious, 100% cautious, skeptical of any farm salmon that's out there. They just don't seem to pass the test. And when they say this is sustainable, or that it's low density, or it's it's marginally better, folks. The industry has cleaned up a little bit, let's face it, because they were under tons of scrutiny in the last 30 years. But the biggest problem with farmed salmon, folks, is farmed salmon is killing off the wild salmon, because they take the farmed salmon pens and they put them in the migratory paths of the wild salmon. The wild salmon swim up the stream, spawn, little baby fish fry come down, swim past the farms, and all the disease and all the lice and the viruses get transferred to these little small baby salmon that then can have no longer a real shot at thriving and living, and they die. Once the sea lice start attaching on them, they're gone, they're finished. The sea lice, they'll just cover a whole baby salmon fry because they're just all over the salmon farms, and they're just swimming right by. So the migratory path, when you place salmon farms in the migratory path of wild salmon, you have disasters. And typically that's how they're done. In Canada, that's how they're done. In whether East Coast, West Coast, Norway, Scotland, Faroe Islands, these are all put in the migratory path, folks. Salmon is not native to the southern hemisphere, so you can exclude the Chilean farms and the farms from New Zealand, because there are no wild salmon indigenous to that area down there. So it's all northern hemisphere. They stick it all in the migratory path, which is a detriment to the wild population. So that's my chef on a mission tip for today. That's why so many salmon are dying, because this toxic algae bloom that they just can't escape, and that they exacerbate and make it worse in these bays. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. And until the next video.